quiet man offers tea to a homeless veteran. What follows is a redemption 20 years in the making. Welcome to Stallone Unleashed. Let's uncover what really happened. The city exhaled a weary, rain-slick sigh as the evening rush hour began its slow, grinding retreat. Elias Thorne, a man who often found a strange solace in the melancholic beauty of such moments, stood under the dripping awning of a closed newsstand, a quiet observer of the urban ballet. His worn tweed jacket, damp from the persistent drizzle, seemed to absorb the gray light of the fading day. He clutched a leather satchel containing a few books and a thermos of lukewarm tea, his usual companions on these solitary rambles through the city's forgotten corners. In his pocket, his fingers found the familiar, cool smoothness of a small, perfectly round river stone, a talisman against the world's sharp edges, a reminder of endurance, of the slow, patient shaping of time. His attention was drawn to a figure huddled in a nearby doorway, a man whose presence was a study in defeated stillness. He was older, his face a roadmap of hardship. His clothes, though not ragged, were clearly worn, mismatched, inadequate for the encroaching damp and chill. A faded army green duffel bag rested at his feet, its canvas softened with age and use. He was a veteran, Elias surmised, not just from the bag, but from the way he held himself, a certain disciplined posture that even hardship had not entirely erased, overlaid with a profound, bone-deep weariness. People hurried past, their umbrellas a-bobbing, in different river, their gazes fixed forward, deliberately avoiding the uncomfortable reality of the man in the doorway. It was a familiar scene, a quiet, everyday tragedy of invisibility that never failed to stir a familiar ache in Elias's chest. He watched as the man, whose name he did not know, shivered, pulling the thin lapels of his jacket tighter around his neck. There was no self-pity in the man's expression, only a stoic, resigned acceptance of his circumstances. Elias felt that familiar, insistent tug, the quiet imperative of his conscience. He was not a man for grand gestures, for public displays of charity. His interventions were usually quieter, more personal, aimed at restoring a sliver of dignity, of connection, in a world that so often dealt in dismissal. He approached the doorway slowly, his footsteps making almost no sound on the wet pavement. The man looked up as Elias drew near, his eyes, the color of faded flag, initially wary, defensive, the look of someone long accustomed to being moved on, to being treated as a problem to be solved. "Evening," Elias said, his voice low, calm. "It's a cold one." The man didn't reply immediately, his gaze assessing Elias, trying to discern his intentions. Then, with a curt, almost imperceptible nod, he acknowledged Elias's presence. "That it is," he rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. Elias didn't press. He simply stood there for a moment, sharing the meager shelter of the doorway, a silent offering of solidarity. He then opened his satchel and took out the thermos. "I have some tea," he said, his tone casual, unassuming. "It's not much, but it's warm. Would you care for a cup?" The man stared at him, a flicker of surprise, then suspicion, in his tired eyes. "Tea," he repeated, as if the word were a foreign concept. "Why?" "Because it's a cold night," Elias replied simply, "and a warm drink is a small comfort. No other reason." He poured some of the steaming tea into the thermos cap and offered it to the man. For a long moment, the man hesitated, his pride warring with his need. Then slowly his gnarled, trembling hand reached out and took the cup. He cradled it in both hands, its warmth a small, tangible blessing against the encroaching chill. "Thank you," he mumbled, his gaze dropping to the steaming liquid. Elias poured a cup for himself and leaned against the wall of the newsstand, the two of them sharing a quiet, unexpected moment of communion in the heart of the indifferent city. The river stone in Elias's pocket felt like a quiet affirmation, a testament to the enduring power of small, human connections to warm even the coldest of nights. They stood in a companionable silence for several minutes, the only sounds the gentle hiss of the rain on the pavement and the distant, mournful wail of a siren. The warm, Fragrant steam from the tea seemed to create a small, fragile bubble of comfort around them, a temporary reprieve from the harsh realities of the street. The veteran, whose name Elias would later learn was Samuel, sipped his tea slowly, gratefully, the warmth seeming to seep into his weary bones, to loosen the tight knot of tension in his shoulders. "Been a while," Samuel finally said, his voice still hoarse but a little stronger now, "since someone just offered something, without wanting anything in return." "Kindness shouldn't be a transaction, Samuel," Elias replied quietly, having overheard a passerby use the name earlier with a dismissive tone. "It should be a given, a recognition of our shared humanity." Samuel looked at him, then a long, searching look. "You talk like a man who's read a few books." Elias smiled faintly. "A few," he admitted, "and I've learned that the most profound truths are often the simplest, and that the greatest stories are often found not in the grand halls of power, but in the quiet, overlooked corners of the world, in the lives of ordinary people who have endured extraordinary things." Samuel seemed to consider this. He took another slow sip of tea, his gaze distant. "I've endured a few things," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Saw some things I wish I hadn't. Did some things I wish I could forget." He didn't elaborate, but the shadows in his eyes spoke volumes. Elias recognized the familiar landscape of a haunted past, the invisible wounds that so many veterans carried in silence. "Service leaves its mark," Elias said, his voice filled with a quiet, empathetic understanding. "Not all scars are visible." Samuel looked at him, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "You a vet?" "My brother was," Elias replied softly. "He brought the war home with him, in ways that were hard for others to understand." A bond of shared, unspoken understanding seemed to form between the two men in that moment, a connection forged in the crucible of loss, of a sorrow that transcended their different circumstances. "Yeah," Samuel said, his voice thick with a sudden emotion. That's how it is. It never really leaves you. Just finds different ways to hide." He finished his tea and handed the empty cup back to Elias. "Thank you, friend," he said, his voice imbued with a genuine, heartfelt gratitude. That helped. More than you know." He then did something that surprised Elias completely. He reached into the inner pocket of his worn jacket and took out a small, folded, and surprisingly clean envelope. It was creased, its edges softened with age and repeated handling, but it was clearly something of great importance to him. "Here," Samuel said, his voice a little shaky as he held out the envelope to Elias. I want you to have this. I want you to read it. I can't carry it anymore. It's too heavy." Elias was taken aback. "Samuel," he began, "I couldn't possibly." "Please," Samuel insisted, his eyes pleading. "You're the first person who's looked at me, really looked at me like I was still a human being in a long, long time. You'll understand. Just read it. Please." Reluctantly, Elias took the envelope. It felt surprisingly weighty in his hand, imbued with the unspoken history of a lifetime. He looked at Samuel, at the raw vulnerability in his eyes, and he knew he could not refuse. This was an act of profound trust, a sacred offering from one solitary soul to another. "All right, Samuel," Elias said softly. "I'll read it." Samuel nodded, a look of immense, almost unbearable, relief washing over his face. He then pulled his thin coat tighter around himself, gave Elias one last, long, unreadable look, and then turned and shuffled off into the rainy darkness, disappearing into the labyrinthine streets of the city, leaving Elias standing alone in the doorway, the mysterious letter a heavy, potent presence in his hand. Elias stood for a long moment in the shelter of the newsstand awning, the letter from Samuel resting in his hand like a strange, unexpected artifact. The rain had begun to fall more heavily now, its steady drumming a somber accompaniment to his thoughts. He felt a profound sense of responsibility, a feeling that he had just been entrusted with something sacred, a piece of another man's soul. He didn't open the letter immediately. He knew, instinctively, that its contents were not to be read casually, not here, amidst the noise and the indifference of the city street. He needed a quiet space, a place of contemplation, where he could give the letter and the story it undoubtedly contained the respect and the attention it deserved. He walked through the rain-slicked streets, his thoughts a whirlwind of speculation and a deep, empathetic concern for the man who had just disappeared into the night. Who was Samuel, really? What was the story that had become too heavy for him to carry? What had he seen? What had he endured that had brought him to this point, a forgotten ghost haunting the city's unforgiving doorways? Elias found his way to a small, all-night cafe, a place he sometimes frequented on his late-night rambles. It was a haven of quiet warmth, its air thick with the scent of coffee and old books, its patrons mostly solitary figures lost in their own worlds. He chose a small, secluded booth in the back, ordered a cup of black coffee, and then, with a sense of almost reverent trepidation, he placed the letter on the table before him. The envelope was worn, its creases deep, a testament to the countless times it must have been opened, read, and refolded. There was no name on the front, no address. It was an intimate communication, intended for an audience of one, or perhaps for no audience at all, simply a repository for words that could not be spoken aloud. He took a slow, steadying sip of his coffee, its bitterness a sharp, grounding sensation. Then, with careful, deliberate fingers, he opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded several times. The paper itself was old, yellowed, its edges brittle. The handwriting was a neat, almost elegant, cursive, the ink faded to a pale blue, yet still perfectly legible. It was not Samuel's handwriting, Elias realized with a jolt. It was the script of a different hand, from a different time. He began to read. "My dearest Michael," the letter began, the salutation filled with a tender, aching affection. "I hope this letter finds you well, my love, though I know that well is a relative term in the place where you are. I pray for you every night, for your safety, for your strength, for your swift and certain return to me, to us." Elias's heart constricted. Michael, that was the name Samuel had spoken, the name of his son, the son who had never come home. This was a letter to Samuel's son, a letter from his mother, perhaps, or a sweetheart, a voice from a past filled with love and a desperate, fragile hope. He read on, his eyes scanning the faded blue ink, the words a poignant testament to a love that had transcended distance, that had tried to bridge the chasm of war with the fragile, tenacious power of the written word. The letter spoke of small, everyday things, the changing of the seasons back home, the antics of a beloved family pet, the latest news from friends and neighbors. It was a deliberate attempt to create a small pocket of normalcy, of home, for a young man surrounded by the chaos and the horror of conflict. But beneath the surface of these cheerful domestic updates, Elias could feel a powerful undercurrent of fear, of longing, of an almost unbearable anxiety for the safety of the one she loved. "I carry your picture with me always," the letter continued, "and I look at it a dozen times a day. I see your smile, your eyes, and I remember the boy you were, the man you were becoming. And I hold on to that memory, that promise, with all my strength. It is my anchor in this storm of uncertainty, my hope in these long, lonely days." Elias had to pause, his own eyes blurring. He thought of his own brother, of the letters he had received, so similar in their desperate, hopeful tone. He knew the weight of those letters, the way they could be both a source of immense comfort and a painful reminder of all that was at stake, all that could be lost. He took another sip of coffee, then returned to the letter, his heart aching with a profound, empathetic sorrow. The final paragraph was almost a prayer, a desperate plea to a universe that often seemed deaf to such entreaties. "Please, my love, come home soon. Come home safe. I am waiting for you. We are all waiting for you. Know that you are loved, more than words can ever say. Know that you are missed every minute of every day. And know that you are, and always will be, my hero. All my love, forever, Sarah." Sarah, Samuel's wife, Lily's mother. The letter was a time capsule, a perfectly preserved moment of love and hope, written just before the darkness had fallen, just before the news had come that would shatter their world forever. Elias now understood the weight of this small, folded piece of paper. It was not just a letter. It was a relic, a sacred testament to a love that had been lost, a future that had been stolen. And he understood, with a devastating clarity, why it had become too heavy for Samuel to carry. It was the unbearable weight of what might have been. Elias sat in the quiet cafe, the letter from Sarah to her son, Michael, resting on the table before him like a sacred, fragile artifact. The simple, heartfelt words, written with such love, such hope, such a desperate, yearning faith in a future that would never come to pass, had pierced him to the core. He understood now, with a clarity that was both illuminating and heartbreaking, the true depth of Samuel's sorrow, the complex, layered nature of his loss. It was not just the loss of a son to the ravages of war. It was the loss of a wife, a daughter, a home, a life, all of it a tragic, cascading consequence of a grief too profound, a trauma too deep to be borne. The letter was a testament to the world that had been shattered, a perfect, poignant snapshot of the before, a time when hope was still possible, when love was a vibrant, living force, not just a painful, ghostly memory. Elias carefully refolded the letter and slipped it back into its worn envelope. He felt an immense sense of responsibility, of a sacred trust. Samuel had given him this most precious, most painful piece of his past, and in doing so, had made Elias a keeper of his story, a guardian of his memory. He knew he could not simply walk away, could not simply return to his own quiet life, leaving Samuel to his solitary grief on the city's cold, indifferent streets. The encounter on the bus, the shared tea, the unexpected confession, the handing over of the letter, it had all been a prelude, a series of quiet, almost fated steps leading to this moment, to a choice that Elias now knew he had to make. He thought of Samuel's other confession, the one about his daughter, Lily, about the small, hand-carved gifts he left for her every year on her birthday in a park on the east side of the city. He remembered the raw, aching love in Samuel's voice as he had spoken her name, the desperate, fragile hope that she might, one day, find his small tokens of remembrance. And he remembered the most poignant detail of all. Lily's birthday was tomorrow. An idea, audacious and perhaps foolhardy, began to form in Elias's mind. An idea born of a deep, empathetic conviction that some wounds, however old, however deep, deserved a chance to heal, that some connections, however frayed, deserved a chance to be mended. He knew it was a long shot, a gamble against the overwhelming odds of time, of distance, of the accumulated pain of 2 decades of silence and separation. But he also knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that he had to try. He had to do it for Samuel, for the broken man who still possessed such a profound capacity for love. He had to do it for Michael, the son whose sacrifice deserved to be honored not just with sorrow, but with a renewed effort to heal the family his loss had shattered. And he had to do it for Lily, the daughter who had grown up without a father, who perhaps still wondered, still yearned, still carried her own invisible wounds. He paid for his coffee, his mind now a whirl of possibilities, of plans, of a quiet, determined resolve. He stepped out of the cafe and into the pre-dawn chill, the city still asleep, its usual roar reduced to a low, expectant hum. His own quiet life, his books, his solitary rambles would have to wait. A different kind of journey had begun, a quest not into the annals of history, but into the living, breathing, often painful heart of the present. He had no map, no clear destination, only a name, a park, and a profound, unwavering belief in the redemptive power of a love that had refused to die. The river stone in his pocket felt like a compass, its smooth, solid presence a guide in this uncertain, yet vital, new direction. The first challenge was to find Samuel again. Elias knew it would be like searching for a ghost in a city of millions. Samuel had no fixed address, no phone, no digital footprint. He was one of the city's invisible men, his existence a fleeting presence in doorways, on park benches, on the late-night buses that traversed the city's forgotten arteries. But Elias was a patient man, a skilled observer, and he had a few clues. He knew Samuel was a veteran, and he knew that many of the city's homeless veterans tended to congregate in certain areas, to seek out certain services, to find a fragile sense of community amongst those who shared similar, often unspoken, history. He started at a well-known veterans outreach center in a gritty downtown neighborhood. He described Samuel to the tired-looking but kind-eyed social worker on duty, an older man, thin, with weary, flag-blue eyes, carrying a faded army green duffel bag. The social worker listened patiently, then shook her head. "Sounds like a lot of our guys, to be honest," she said, her voice tinged with a gentle sadness. "But the name, Samuel Hemlock, it doesn't ring a bell. He's not registered with us." Elias thanked her and continued his search. He spent the next several hours walking the streets, his gaze scanning the faces of the men and women huddled in doorways, gathered in small, forlorn groups in the city's less-traveled parks. He visited soup kitchens, shelters, drop-in centers, each time describing Samuel, each time meeting with the same sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful response. The city, which had seemed so full of possibility just a few hours before, now felt vast, anonymous, an impenetrable labyrinth. As the morning wore on, a cold knot of anxiety began to form in Elias's stomach. Time was running out. Lily's birthday was today. If he couldn't find Samuel, if he couldn't convince him to take this one desperate chance, then the opportunity, the fragile window of hope, might be lost forever. He found himself near a small, unassuming church that ran a modest breakfast program. He went inside, the scent of coffee and frying bacon a welcome respite from the cold street. And there, sitting at a long, communal table, hunched over a plate of eggs, was Samuel. Elias felt a wave of relief, so profound it almost made him dizzy. He approached the table slowly, not wanting to startle the older man. "Samuel," he said softly. Samuel looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. "Elias? What were you doing here?" "I was looking for you, Samuel," Elias replied, pulling up a chair beside him. "We have some work to do." He then spent the next hour laying out his plan, his voice low, calm, persuasive. He told Samuel about his idea, about the possibility of finding Lily, about the significance of this day, her birthday. He acknowledged the risks, the potential for heartbreak, the immense courage it would take for Samuel to face his daughter after all these years. Arthur listened, his initial disbelief slowly giving way to a dawning, terrified hope. He protested, of course. He spoke of his shame, of his appearance, of his fear that Lily would reject him, that his presence would only bring her more pain. "Look at me, Elias," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, gesturing at his own threadbare clothes. "I'm a bum, a ghost. What right do I have to walk back into her life, to dredge up all the old pain?" "You have the right of a father who loves his daughter, Arthur," Elias countered gently but firmly. "And you're not a ghost. You are a man who has suffered, a man who has made mistakes, yes, but also a man who has endured, who has served, who has kept a flame of love alive in his heart for 20 long years. That is not a ghost, my friend. That is a hero." He then told Samuel what he had discovered in the pre-dawn hours at the diner, about Lily Carmichael, the teacher, the community gardener at Willow Creek Park. He showed Samuel the picture on his phone, and watched as Arthur's face crumpled with a mixture of joy and an almost unbearable sorrow. The final, crucial piece of the plan, Elias explained, was the most difficult, the most audacious. "We're going to go to that park, Arthur," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Today, on her birthday, and you're going to give her gift in person." The challenge hung in the air, immense, terrifying, yet also filled with an almost unbearable sense of possibility. The journey, Elias knew, was far from over. But the first, most difficult step, the step of finding Samuel, of rekindling a fragile spark of hope in his weary heart, had been taken. The journey to Willow Creek Park was a silent one, each man lost in his own thoughts. The air in the small taxi Elias had hailed thick with a mixture of hope and a profound, heart-pounding trepidation. Arthur clutched a small, newly carved wooden flower in his trembling hand, A simple, elegant bloom he had fashioned from a scrap of what he'd found, his old carpenter's hands moving with a muscle memory that had survived decades of disuse. He had tried to refuse Elias's offer of a new, clean shirt and jacket, purchased from a nearby second-hand store. But Elias had insisted, gently but firmly. A man should face his future with dignity. Arthur, he had said. And sometimes a clean shirt can be a kind of armor. Now, as they approached the park, Arthur's anxiety was a palpable thing. He kept wiping his sweaty palms on his trousers, his breathing shallow, his gaze darting nervously out the window. "What if she's not there, Elias?" he whispered, his voice a hoarse croak. "What if she is, and she hates me? What if she tells me to get lost?" "She might, Arthur," Elias replied honestly, his voice calm, steadying. "That is a possibility we must be prepared for. If she does, we will respect her wishes. We will leave, but we will have tried. We will have honored your love for her by taking this one brave step. And that, in itself, is a kind of victory." He paused, then added, "But what if she doesn't, Arthur? What if she has been waiting, wondering, hoping for 20 years? What if your presence is the one gift she has been longing for all this time?" The taxi pulled up to the park entrance. The two men got out, the crisp autumn air a sharp contrast to the heated atmosphere inside the cab. The park was a quiet oasis of green and gold, the late afternoon sun casting long, gentle shadows. They could see the community garden in the distance, a few figures moving amongst the raised beds. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt an almost overwhelming urge to turn, to run, to retreat back into the familiar, if painful, anonymity of his old life. But then he felt Elias's gentle, steadying hand on his shoulder. "One step at a time, friend," Elias said softly. "We do this together." And so, they began to walk, two solitary figures on a quest that was both deeply personal and profoundly universal, a journey towards a possible reconciliation, a potential healing, a fragile, desperate hope for a second chance. As they drew nearer, they could see a woman with dark, flowing hair, her back to them, kneeling by a bed of late-blooming marigolds. Arthur stopped, his breath catching in his throat. Even from this distance, even after all these years, he knew. It was her. It was Lily. He felt Elias's hand squeeze his shoulder, a silent message of encouragement, of solidarity. And with a courage he hadn't known he possessed, a courage born of a father's enduring love and a stranger's unexpected kindness, Arthur took a deep, shuddering breath and took another step forward. The final, most difficult part of the journey was about to begin. Lily looked up from the marigolds she was tending as the two men approached. A slight frown creased her brow as she took in their appearance. Elias, with his quiet, scholarly air, and Arthur, his face a roadmap of hardship, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that was both startling and strangely, achingly familiar. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but with a note of caution, the natural reserve of a woman approached by two unknown men in a quiet park. Arthur stopped a few feet away, his courage momentarily deserting him. He couldn't speak. He could only stare at his daughter, at the woman she had become, his heart a tumultuous sea of love, regret, and a profound, paralyzing fear. Elias stepped forward slightly, his presence calm, reassuring. "Miss Carmichael?" he asked, his voice gentle. "My name is Elias Thorne, and this is a friend of mine. He has something for you. A birthday gift." Lily's frown deepened. "A birthday gift? From whom? I don't believe I know." Her voice trailed off as her gaze fell upon the small, exquisitely carved wooden flower that Arthur was holding out with a trembling hand. Her eyes widened. She looked from the flower to Arthur's face, and then back to the flower. A flicker of something, a ghost of a memory, stirred in the depths of her mind. She had seen carvings like this before. Over the years, on her birthday, she had sometimes found them in this very park, small, anonymous tokens of a love she had long believed to be lost forever. A wooden bird, a delicate leaf, a tiny, perfect star. She had kept them all, a secret, poignant collection of mysteries that she had never been able to solve. And now, this man, this stranger with the haunted, familiar eyes, was offering her another. Who? Who are you? She whispered, her voice barely audible, her heart beginning to pound with a wild, improbable hope. Arthur finally found his voice, though it was a cracked, hoarse sound, thick with the unshed tears of 2 decades. Lily, he breathed, the name a prayer, a lament, a declaration of a love that had never died. Lilybug. It's me. It's your daddy. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Lily stared at him, her mind reeling, trying to reconcile the image of this broken, weathered man with the faint, cherished memories of the strong, vibrant father she had lost so long ago. She looked into his eyes, those faded flag blue eyes, and she saw it. The same love, the same tenderness, the same profound sorrow that had haunted her own quiet moments for so many years. Tears began to stream down her face, tears of shock, of disbelief, of a joy so overwhelming it was almost painful. Daddy, she whispered, the word a fragile bridge across a chasm of 20 years. And then, she closed the distance between them, her arms wrapping around him in a fierce, desperate embrace, her face buried in the rough fabric of his second-hand coat. Arthur, his own body racked with sobs, held her tightly, as if he could pour all the love, all the regret, all the unspoken words of 2 decades into that single, redemptive embrace. Elias watched them, his own eyes blurred with tears. He felt like a privileged witness to a sacred, holy moment, a testament to the enduring, unbreakable power of a father's love. The river stone in his pocket felt warm, a silent affirmation of a journey completed, a connection restored, a quiet miracle unfolding in the golden light of a late autumn afternoon. They stood locked in that embrace for a long, timeless moment, 2 souls, once adrift, now anchored in the profound, healing reality of their reunion. The other gardeners in the park, sensing the sacredness of the moment, had fallen silent, their work forgotten, their gazes a mixture of surprise and a quiet, respectful empathy. The only sounds were the soft rustle of the autumn leaves and the choked, cathartic sobs of a father and a daughter, finally, impossibly, reunited. Lily eventually pulled back slightly, her hands still clutching her father's arms, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to memorize every line, every scar, every testament to the hard years that had separated them. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I thought, Mom said you were gone, that you didn't want us anymore. Arthur's face crumpled with a fresh wave of pain and regret. No, Lilybug, he rasped, his voice a raw, aching sound. Never. Not for a single day. I was sick, Lily. Sick in a way that people couldn't see. The war, it broke something inside me. And I wasn't strong enough to fix it. I thought you and your mother would be better off without me, without the darkness I carried. Oh, Daddy, Lily cried, her tears flowing freely now. We were never better off without you. Not for a moment. I missed you. Every single day. She then looked at the small wooden flower still clutched in her hand. These were from you? All these years? The little bird, the star? Arthur nodded, unable to speak, his own tears a silent testament to his enduring, unwavering love. I kept them all, Lily whispered. I have them in a little box by my bed. I always hoped. I always dreamed, but I never thought. Her voice trailed off, her heart too full for words. Elias, feeling that his presence was now an intrusion on this intensely private reunion, began to back away slowly, his own heart aching with a profound, empathetic joy. He had been a catalyst, a quiet guide, but this story, this healing, now belonged to them, to Arthur and Lily. As he turned to leave, Lily's voice, clear and strong now, stopped him. Wait, she said, her eyes, so like her father's, meeting his. You're the man from the bus, aren't you? The one my father told me about in his letter? Elias stopped, a look of profound surprise on his face. Letter? What letter? It was Lily's turn to look confused. The letter he left for me, she said, here at the park, tucked into the hollow of the old willow tree, our special spot. He told me all about you, about your kindness, about how you helped him find the courage to come here today. Elias stared at her, then at Arthur, a slow, dawning understanding illuminating his features. Samuel hadn't just given him a letter from the past. He had, in his own quiet, desperate way, orchestrated this entire encounter, using Elias as a willing, if unwitting, accomplice in his quest for redemption. The letter he had been given, the one from Sarah to Michael, had been a test, a way for Samuel to gauge Elias's heart, to see if he was a man worthy of being entrusted with his most precious, most fragile hope. And the story of his daughter, his whispered confession on the bus, had not been a prelude to a search, but a plea for an escort, for a steadying presence on the final, most terrifying leg of a journey he had been planning all along. Elias looked at Arthur, who now had the grace to look slightly abashed, a faint, sheepish grin touching his lips. I had to know if you were the real deal, Elias, Arthur admitted, his voice still a little shaky. I had to know if you were a man who understood echoes. Elias simply shook his head, a slow, wondering smile spreading across his own face. He felt not deceived, but profoundly, deeply honored. He had been a part of a story even more intricate, more beautiful than he had realized. The quiet observer had become an unwitting, but essential, character in a father's desperate, beautiful, and ultimately triumphant love story. The revelation of Arthur's quiet, desperate machinations hung in the air, not as a deception, but as a testament to the profound, often complex, lengths a human heart will go to in its quest for connection, for redemption. Elias felt a wave of deep, humble admiration for this man who, from the depths of his own despair, had orchestrated such a fragile, intricate plan, a plan that had hinged entirely on the kindness of a stranger. Well, Arthur, Elias said, a warm, genuine chuckle in his voice, it seems you are a far more skilled strategist than I gave you credit for, and a far better judge of character, perhaps. Arthur's sheepish grin widened slightly. A man learns a few things, living on the streets, he said, his voice regaining some of its earlier, gravelly strength. You learn to read people. You learn to see the good when it's there. And I saw it in you, Elias. From the moment you sat down next to me on that bus, from the moment you offered me that cup of tea, I knew. Lily, who had been listening to this exchange with a look of dawning wonder, now turned to Elias, her eyes shining with a gratitude so profound it was almost palpable. So, the letter you read, it wasn't from my father? No, Lily, Elias explained gently. It was a letter your mother, Sarah, wrote to your uncle, Michael, your father's son from a previous life during the war. Your father, he entrusted it to me, as a way of sharing a piece of his own story, his own loss, without having to speak the words himself. Lily looked at her father, a new layer of understanding, of a deep, empathetic sorrow for all he had endured, dawning in her eyes. Oh, Daddy, she whispered, her hand finding his again, their fingers intertwining. You've carried so much, for so long, all by yourself. Not anymore, Lily Bug, Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion, his gaze fixed on his daughter's face as if he could never get his fill of looking at her. Not anymore. Elias, feeling that his role in this beautiful, unfolding drama was now complete, knew it was time to take his leave. He had been a catalyst, a guide, a steadying presence. But the journey ahead now belonged to Arthur and Lily, a journey of rediscovery, of healing, of rebuilding a relationship that had been lost, but never ever forgotten. I believe, Elias said softly, that this is where I get off the bus, so to speak. Arthur and Lily turned to him, their expressions a mixture of gratitude and a reluctance to let him go. Mr. Thorne, Lily began, how can we ever thank you? You gave me back my father. No, Lily, Elias corrected gently. Your father's love, his unwavering 20-year vigil, gave him back to you. I was merely a fortunate bystander, a witness to a love story that refused to end. He offered them both a warm, genuine smile. You two have a lot of catching up to do, he said. a lot of stories to share, and that is a journey best taken together and alone. He turned to walk away, but Arthur's voice stopped him. Elias, wait. Elias turned back. Arthur fumbled in his pocket and took out a small, worn, leather-bound notebook and a stub of a pencil. Your address, Arthur said, his voice firm, insistent. So I can stay in touch. Let you know how things are going. Elias smiled, a deep, heartfelt smile. He took the notebook and carefully wrote down his address. I would like that very much, Arthur, he said. I would like that more than you know. With a final, warm nod to them both, Elias Thorne turned and walked away, leaving the father and daughter standing together in the golden light of the late afternoon, their hands clasped, their hearts full, their future an unwritten page, filled with the promise of a new, more hopeful story. The river stone in Elias's pocket felt like a quiet benediction, a testament to the enduring power of hope, the resilience of the human spirit, and the quiet, unexpected miracles that can unfold when one human being simply chooses to see another. Elias walked away from Willow Creek Park, his heart a strange, beautiful mixture of joy, sorrow, and a profound, almost overwhelming sense of gratitude. He felt like a man who had just stepped out of a particularly moving play, the echoes of its emotional truths still resonating deep within him. The city, which had seemed so gray and indifferent just a day before, now seemed imbued with a new light, a new vibrancy. The ordinary faces of the passers-by seemed to hold new depths, new possibilities of hidden stories, of unspoken sorrows, of enduring loves. He thought of Arthur and Lily, of the long, difficult, yet ultimately beautiful road that lay ahead of them. There would be challenges, he knew. 20 years of silence and separation could not be erased in a single afternoon. There would be difficult conversations, painful memories to confront, a trust to be slowly, carefully rebuilt. But they had the most essential ingredient of all, a deep, abiding, and now reawakened love for one another. And that, Elias believed, was a foundation upon which almost any structure, however damaged, could be repaired, could be made whole again. He found his way back to his own quiet, book-lined apartment, the solitude of it a welcome embrace after the intense emotionality of the past 24 hours. He made himself a cup of tea, its warmth a familiar comfort, and sat in his favorite worn armchair, the one that looked out over the city's sprawling, ever-changing rooftops. He took the river stone from his pocket and placed it on the small table beside him. It seemed to glow with a faint, inner light, a silent witness to the day's extraordinary events. He thought of the letter, the one from Sarah to her son, Michael, the one that had started it all. He had left it with Arthur, knowing that it belonged with him, a part of his story, a testament to the love that had once defined his life, and which, in a way, still did. He knew that Arthur's journey was far from over. The demons of his past, the invisible wounds of war, would not simply vanish. But now, he would not have to face them alone. He had his daughter. He had Lily. And in her love, in her forgiveness, in her simple, unwavering presence, he would find a strength, a solace, a reason to keep fighting, to keep healing. And Lily, too, had found something she had long been missing. A father, a connection to her own past, an answer to the unspoken questions that had likely haunted her for years. The small carved wooden birds she had collected, once symbols of a mysterious, anonymous love, were now imbued with a new, profound meaning, a tangible link to a father who had never, not for a single moment, forgotten her. Elias felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. He had been a catalyst, a facilitator, a quiet instrument of a fate that had perhaps been waiting for just the right moment, just the right person to set its course. He had not sought out this drama, had not intended to become so deeply enmeshed in the lives of two strangers. But he was profoundly grateful that he had. It had been a powerful reminder of what he had always believed to be true, that even in the darkest of corners, in the most broken of hearts, the light of love, of hope, of the enduring, resilient human spirit can never be truly extinguished. It may flicker, it may dim, but it is always there, waiting for a gentle breath, a kind word, a simple act of connection, to fan it back into a steady, warming flame. And Elias Thorne, the quiet historian, the keeper of forgotten stories, knew that his own life's purpose was simply to be one of those gentle breaths, to keep watch for those flickering flames, and to do what little he could to help them burn brightly once more.